Welcome to the Littoral Zone podcast. I'm your host, Phil Rowley. The Littoral Zone, or shoal area of the lake, is a place where the majority of the action takes place. My podcast is intended to do the same, put you where the action is to help you improve your stillwater fly fishing. On each broadcast, I, along with guests from all over the world, will be providing you with information, tips and tricks, flies, presentation techniques, along with different lakes or regions to explore. I hope you enjoy today's podcast. Please feel free to email me with your stillwater-related fly fishing questions and comments. I do my best to answer as many as we can prior to each episode, just before the main content. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy today's show. I'm often asked what my favorite lake is to fish. The answer to this question is tough, because there are just so many factors to consider. My response would be similar to what my favorite fly is. Frankly, there's no clear answer. There are many factors to consider. If it were purely about the largest fish, it might be Argentina's Jurassic Lake. However, I also have many lakes with fond memories of spending time with family and friends, and they could also make my list. Lakes that offer extremely challenging conditions that test my skills also place these lakes amongst my favorites. Once again, there's no clear, good answer. Many lakes fall onto my favorites lakes list. One of these lakes is Idaho's Henry's Lake. Henry's Lake offers scenic beauty, challenging conditions, the opportunity for huge fish, and numerous memories. Today's guest, Darren Huntsman, also shares my love for Henry's Lake. Idaho born and raised, Darren has spent not just hours exploring and learning the nuances of Henry's Lake, but years. I invite you to join Darren and me as we discuss how he first started fly fishing, his love for stillwater fly fishing, in particular Henry's Lake, and the flies and presentation techniques he uses throughout the season. You will find that Darren's approach, strategies, flies, and presentation techniques also work on other lakes as well. But before I talk with Darren, I want to respond to a question from Tim Carpenter. Today's podcast question is a good one, and one that frankly could spawn numerous episodes all on their own. Tim Carpenter asks, and he has many questions, but his main question is, how do I know when to use which line in which situation? Floating with bobber, indicator, midge tip, slow, fast sinking, etc. Again, a great question, and as I mentioned a few seconds ago, one worthy each of their own episode. Now, thankfully, I already have recorded a couple of episodes, a two-part series entitled Making Sense of Stillwater Fly Lines. You can check those out early in my podcast library. But again, the choices when you get to stillwater fly fishing, if you're coming from moving waters, the sheer volume of lines available to you can be a little overwhelming. You know, there's lines, different types of floating lines, whether you're fishing dries, you want a different line for that. Whether you're fishing indicators or long leaders, you're going to need a line that's better designed for turning over that mast, basically oversized heads and short front tapers with the mast pushed towards the tip of the line to help push all that over. And then, of course, you've got your midge tips and your emerger tips and your hover lines and your clear intermediates and all your different sinking lines. Then you've got sweep lines or parabolic lines. And then you've got lines that may not be designed specifically for still waters, but they have great stillwater applications. Sometimes fly fishers don't understand or realize these lines are available because of the brackets they're put in on a fly line company website or the names they use to help sell and market them. But they all have a place. But what I would recommend as a core of lines every stillwater fly fisher should have is a floating line that's best designed for fishing subsurface, for using indicators, and for fishing long leaders and weighted nymphs. You got to remember, we don't get the surface activity generally that river and stream anglers get. All of the fishing is typically done subsurface. So that's why you want those lines that are best suited for casting indicator rigs, long leaders, weighted flies. then you'd want a line that's a clear intermediate, something that sinks at about 1.5 to 2 inches per second. This is a great line for trolling around, if you like to do that, for fishing nymphs and streamers and leeches, shallow. You can also fish chironomid pupa with it, very versatile line. And then you'd want some sort of fast sinking line, either from a type 3 sink rate, perhaps down to a type 7. And that choice is going to be based a little bit on the depth of the local waters you're going to fish. If you're going to fish a lot of deep lakes with not much shallow shoal area, then you're probably going to want to fish something in that type 5, type 7 line that sinks anywhere from 5 to 7 inches per second. But if your lakes are predominantly shallow, like Henry's Lake, we're going to talk to you about on today's episode, which is the deepest part is less than 20 feet deep and often averaging even less than that, then a type 3 line is probably more than enough line for that lake. So a tough question. Sorry if I didn't answer it specifically, but each of these questions within a question that Tim had are worthy of their own episode. And I'm going to commit to doing episodes on indicator fishing, the situations you'd want to use that in, episodes on fishing long leader naked technique, midge tips, arguably one of the most misunderstood fly lines out there. Lots of different applications for that line. And I also did an episode as well on sinking line techniques. So I encourage Tim and everyone else to check out that episode, Going Deep, Sinking Line Strategies and Tactics for Still Waters. So I hope in a roundabout way I gave some insight to Tim's question. It's a tough one to answer because there's just so much good answers to all of those questions, and trying to get it down to one simple yes, no, black and white answer, unfortunately, isn't always easy because a lot of times it's situationally specific, and many times a line may have a specific purpose, but also has secondary purposes you can use it for as well. For example, you can use a midge tip to fish dry flies. So again, that would be something I would cover in the midge tip episode. So hopefully I shed some light onto that. Stillwater fly lines can be a little daunting, a little overpowering, a little confusing, a little intimidating. You don't need all of those lines. I look at them as kind of golf clubs, if you will. Well, you have the core set of clubs you can get around most golf courses with. So again, that would be your floating line designed for fishing indicators and long leader weighted nymphs. Then that clear intermediate that sinks at about 2 inches per second. And then some sort of fast sinking line from a type 3, 3 inches per second, type 5, 5 inches per second, or a type 7, 7 inches per second that best suits the sinking needs you envision you're going to use it on. And then once you get comfortable with those lines, then you can start looking at the other ones and start filling in the blanks, and they're going to help you out in those specific sort of niche presentation challenges you're going to face. That line, maybe it's a midge tip, maybe it's a sweep, is going to be a better line choice for you. But one thing you want to remember is whenever you buy a fly line, learn how to use it, get familiar with it, so you're going to pull it out and use it as much as you can. There's no point in buying a fly line that's just going to sit at home in your kit bag, in a pocket in your float tube or pontoon boat, and you're never going to pull it out. And the best time to figure out how to use a fly line is when you're on the water and the fishing is good, they're active, they're willing to eat the fly. Maybe you're catching them a lot on strike indicators. Maybe it's time to maybe pull out a midge tip or just use that floating line with a long leader and a set of weighted nymphs and see if you can catch them that way. Because once you get the experience of fishing those lines and having some success, then the next time you're on the water and things aren't going as well, then you're more likely to pull out these different lines, these different techniques, and give them a try to see if they're going to unlock the puzzle. Because it's no good trying something you've never done before in a situation that is not working, like it's slow fishing. That's not really the time you want to experiment with a different technique or a different line you're not familiar with, because if you're not successful, you don't know whether it was the line, your technique, the fish, or a combination of all three. So I hope that helps. And again, I commit, because I'm always looking for good ideas for future podcasts, and that's what these questions often create. So again, great question from Tim. And if you have any additional questions you can think of, please don't hesitate to reach out and email me through my email address, flycraft@shaw.ca, or you could send a question through my Instagram, Phil Rowley Fly Fishing, or my Facebook page, Phil Rowley Fly Fishing, or phil@philrowleyflyfishing.com through my website, Phil Rowley Fly Fishing. So lots of ways to get to me. Get those questions to me, and hopefully I can help you out. And now on to our podcast. All right, Darren, Thanks for joining me on my Littoral Zone podcast. It's an honor to have you here, and it's important because I think we're talking about one of my favorite still waters here in Henry's Lake and why it deserves a deep dive. It's got a pretty incredible legacy as a trophy stillwater trout fishery, and many anglers from all over North America go to visit it, and I'm sure from other parts of the planet. And of course, it's a personal favorite with you because it's just up the road from where you live. So, why don't we get into a little bit about yourself? Tell us a little bit about Darren Huntsman and where he came from, and how did he end up falling in love with Henry's Lake like I have?
Cool. Thanks, Phil. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, you're welcome.
You're one of my idols. And after getting to
God.
fish with you for a couple of weeks over the last couple of years, it's fun to visit with you.
Yeah. So talk about Darren. Let's talk about Darren first. So you're native Idahoan, is that the right
I
way?
am.
Yeah.
Born and raised, my mom and dad had a place down just outside of Shelley, Idaho, just south of Idaho Falls.
Okay.
And luckily, we were right on the Snake River. There are not better places for a kid to grow
That's
up.
a pretty good body of water.
Yeah, good place to tromp around. I was really lucky because my dad was a hunting and fishing fanatic, and by the age of about 6, I was his shadow. And I was lucky because I've seen a lot of guys out in boats and different things like that with kids, and their patience runs thin sometimes, probably mine included. He wanted us to learn, and he taught us, and it just absolutely thrilled him to see us grasp things and then be able to do them on our own.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I was really lucky in that way.
And always fly fishing, or did you start gear and transmit to fly, or was fly
Oh,
fishing
yeah.
right from the start?
Well, some of my earliest fly fishing memories was we had a memory or a reservoir that's just west of us that my granddad loved. It's called Mackey Reservoir. And as kids, we'd go out and we'd jump in the boat, all the cousins, and we'd go out and we'd, put that worm 6 feet under our bobber and then stand there or sit there in the boat and watch that bobber. And my dad, as soon as he'd get all us kids situated, he'd grab his fly rod and stand in the bow of the boat and start casting. And I can still remember almost every time we'd go out there, the bigger fish was always off the fly rod underneath the surface. And that just stuck with me all through growing up through the bobber days. And then when I finally got my first fly rod when I was probably 7 or 8, and I remember catching my very first fish on a fly rod, putting it on a paper plate in the fridge, and my mom and dad were out. But I put it in there so that when they came home, they'd see it. And from then on, it was fish, 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 fish.
Yeah. And what led you to Henry's? How did you get? Because that's arguably your favorite body of water now. Is that fair to say?
It is. My dad was a salmon and steelhead angler. He loved big fish, and that's what got him fly fishing in the lakes that we would fish as kids. And so seeing those big fish, just that's what I wanted to chase all the time was big fish. And that got into salmon and steelhead. I got an opportunity to go to Alaska and spend a couple of weeks every year for 20 years up there because we lost our runs down here in Idaho. So we'd go up there and chase the big fish. Then we ran into problems up there because of the ocean conditions and the trawling, the ocean fishing out there. And so now we're back to really no runs to really fish for. And so we started looking for big fish again. And that's just stillwaters, period.
Yeah. In specific, Henry's, which is, well, again, as we said earlier, one of North America's most hallowed stillwater fisheries. So let's talk about Henry's as well itself. So it's located just north of Island Park, right? So for
Right.
those out there, the two people that are listening.
Yeah, the parrot beak or just the little knob right there in the Centennials, just barely, I guess you'd call it north of Island Park proper, and then south of West Yellowstone. So, yeah, right there on the divide between Montana and Idaho.
Yeah, northern Fremont County. It's a pretty big lake. It's over 6,000 acres. So
Yeah, it's big when you get out on it. When you compare it to some of the other lakes, I love to go down to Pyramid. When you compare those two,
yeah.
there is no comparison. However, yeah, for a lake the size that you want to go out and be able to explore in a weekend, Henry's is the perfect size.
And it's nestled in the intersection of three valleys, right?
Yeah, you basically have 4 different passes that come in, and what makes those passes so important is those are the wind channels for for our lake. And so any direction, northwest, southeast, that wind can hit you from any direction because it sits in that little plateau right between those four valleys.
Patagonia just launched the next evolution in waders, and they're built for anglers just like you. The Swift Current line includes ultralight, packable options for the hiking, crew, and expedition-ready waders if you're hard on your gear like me. They're designed for comfort, built from recycled materials, and backed by Patagonia's ironclad warranty. You can check them out right now at wetflyswing.com/swiftcurrent. That's wetflyswing.com/SWIFTCURRENT. Swift Current waders. Check them out now. San Juan Rodworks started with a simple belief: great fly rods and gear shouldn't cost a fortune. As a family-run company, they focus on building high-quality fly fishing products that perform on the water without the premium price tag. You can try San Juan Rodworks for 30 days risk-free right now, and if you're not satisfied, send it back for a full refund. You can go to sanjuanrodworks.com. That's SANJUAN rodworks.com.
Yeah, because it was unique when we fished it last year, 2025, the fall of 2025. I remember one day we were at the county launch, right? And it was calm.
Yep.
We went over near the state launch and it was blowing pretty good. And there was this little sort of dividing line about halfway across the lake. It was kind of unique how that went as well. So its elevation is quite high, over 6,000 feet. I think it says 6,470 in my notes here. And so that's pretty high. So that means it fishes well throughout the season, right? Pretty well. A few dry spots in the warm summers.
About it. When we have our high temps in late July, August, there are a lot of places in that lake where those fish can find refuge from the high surface temperatures. Mm-hmm. And we get temperatures that'll push that 70-degree mark. But if you get around, you can find those spring-fed areas where the fish will congregate because of that warmer water. And yeah, that could be really fun.
Yeah. And the fish in there, you've got Yellowstone cutthroat, brookies, and the hybrids, which everybody really likes because those are the ones that get particularly big. How based on is the population right now? How is it doing? Are they up, down, or is it one doing better than the others?
It's coming back. I think we've seen our low spot and we're starting to come back. About 3 or 4 years ago, our population was pretty small. Our net counts every spring. Fish and Game puts out nets during the night, and they get counts out of those nets, not only fish population, but also what species and what the population densities of those are. Besides the 3 species of trout or subspecies of trout that you mentioned, we also have the Utah chub in there, and they're growing in number. They compete with the trout as far as that goes. They're a pain in our fannies when we hook them as far as that goes. But they're also a food source for these fish too. So it's hard to say, I don't want those Utah chubs in there when they're actually a benefit.
Yeah, because they're definitely, and that's part of the reason those fish get so big. Plus, it's a pretty productive body of water, isn't it?
Yeah, you could have no bait fish in there, and those fish would grow to the sizes they are. The bug life in that lake is astounding.
I know. It reminds me of a lake I fished many years and still do in British Columbia called Tunqua. Obviously not as big as Henry's, but the same basic average depth, very shallow. It's a giant shoal or littoral zone, to throw a plug in there. And it's like Henry's, just bug rich, full of scuds and damsels. And it just amazes me when I go there, the weed growth and the amount of food life that those fish have to eat on. All the food groups are represented there, from the Utah chub, as you mentioned, all the way down to the smallest of chironomids. So there's lots of them to eat there. So I guess
just like Henry's.
And who's the lake named after? It's after a
fur trader by the name of Andrew Henry.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and it was it always in that state, or was it dammed somewhat and levels brought up? How was it?
Yes, it had a dam put in the early 1920s, 1923, and it basically doubled the level of the lake. So it averaged somewhere around 6 to 8 feet before the dam. Max level was probably about 12. Now we average about 12 feet, with the max level max depth about 21, 22 feet, depending on what your water level is on the lake.
And yeah, there's lots of. What I liked about the lake is it's all the famous little places that where you're getting the fish at, the names of the, the cliffs, by Staley's, and I always you don't always see that on lakes, but that lake has quite a historic culture behind it. So
A very historical culture. I was actually, the other day, I found an article in Fly Fishing Magazine back in 1970 talking about Henry's Lake. And it was really cool. It was written by a guy, Dick Gomer.
Dick, okay.
Yep. And it talks about it anyway. It's really interesting because they call it the lake, because they said you can take any other still water, you can take all of the rules that you know for all of the other still waters and lakes and throw them out the door, because it's not going to come to, it's not the same at Henry's.
It is different. I will admit that. The first time I went, it was a little puzzling. It didn't quite behave like other lakes I'm familiar with. It's still, lakes are lakes, so they have their similarities, but it's definitely got a heartbeat and a pulse of its own. The other guy I was thinking of was Marv Taylor. He wrote a book,
bet.
Fly Rods, Float Tubes, and Other
Yep.
Essays. And he had the old Del Canty float tubes that you would fill
Absolutely.
up by just sweeping basically a bag through the air and roll that up and transfer that air you gathered into the float tube and put them up. And those are the old float tubes that look like old toilet seats. There was not a lot. I don't know how anybody.
Just want an inner tube.
Yeah, yeah, the old truck tubes. Now they've come, quite, float tubes and other inflatable watercraft have come quite a ways. So let's talk about when you're fishing Henry's. We talked about the species of fish, and there's those hybrids. That is the sort of the trophy fish there, isn't it? That's what you and I ran into last fall. I was telling, who was I talking to today? I was telling somebody about, we were moving. It's Howard Croston. I was talking to Howard Croston. I was doing another podcast with him. Don't worry, there'll be links to that in the show notes. And just telling him about you and I were, we had plans to go down to, where were we going to go? It was down the east side.
Chesterfield.
Yeah. And we just kept running across, as we pushed through the shallows, just those hybrids scattering everywhere. And we were like, I think we better stop. And those fish were in less than 4 feet of water, weren't they? Just in and amongst the weeds. It was challenging because of the dealing with the weeds. We could, your little, we'll talk about flies in a bit, but your little crystal bugger, unweighted, that little brown one that's just so simple, but it's so deadly. And that was so much fun, just fishing a midge tip hover or a hover line if you could. And that's anything heavier, you were just gardening all day. So it's, those fish were, I was impressed how the average had come back up, because we were getting, I think, the one I got was about 9 pounds, wasn't it? We managed to weigh it in the net.
You got to add another pound to that, because that scale was already parred to my net. So it was 9.1.
Yeah. I remember the panic weighing it, because somebody says, it's in kilograms. I said, don't worry, I got an iPhone. We'll figure it out. Right. Because we're worried about the welfare of the fish and trying to figure the scale out. And it's like, kilograms, we can work with that. We got a measurement. So
yeah.
All right, so based on that, let's talk about your gear. What's your favorite, what fly rods you like as far as weights and lengths, those kind of things? What kind of fly rod would somebody need to bring to Henry's?
Definitely at least a 6-weight. My favorite is a 10-foot 6-weight. I've got a bunch of buddies that fish a 10-foot 7-weight. Not necessarily because every fish that you're going to catch is going to be big enough to play with on a 7-weight, but sometimes that wind can get blowing a little bit. And if you want to throw a longer line, which is, to me, very important when you're fishing still waters, it makes sense to throw a little bit heavier line.
Yeah, it does. It let the tool do the job, right?
Absolutely.
Years ago when I was young and full of energy, I'd fish 5 weights a lot. But as you get older, it's like, you know what? Let's let the tool do the job. And 6s and 7s. You like long rods, short rods? What do you?
I do. Well, to an extent. I like a 10-foot.
Yeah.
My son likes a 10.5-foot. 10.5 is just a little bit too much rod for me to throw all day long. And usually when I fish, I like to fish all day long. So 10-foot 6-weight. I love Sage's R8. I'm in love with Echo Stillwater rod.
Yeah, that's a good rod.
It is really a nice rod.
There's more and more these days, more of those 10. I think we can perhaps attribute that to Euro nymphing and other that had the longer rods, because for years we were struggling on lakes with the old 9-footers, and they just, they don't I just personally, like you, don't feel they perform as well on a lake as the longer rods.
Well, I remember how important they were when we were fishing out of tubes as kids all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, if you look at all the old books that are around about Henry's Lake, you'll see a lot of the authors gripe about the float tube kids, the rubber hats. They used to call it.
Cheerios bowl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember when Sage came out with their RPL 3,
Mm-hmm.
and they had a 9'6" six weight, and it was the ideal tool.
Yeah.
And of course, now that we can get 10 foots and 10.6s, it's even better when you're sitting in the water. But I'm lucky enough to do it out of a boat mostly now.
Yeah. What about fly lines? What fly line should somebody be bringing to Henry's?
You've basically got to have 3 fly lines there. 4 ideal, but you can get away with 3. You want your floater for your indicator work.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a calm day and you can use a super long leader, you can still use that floater and retrieve. If you're going to retrieve, I want at least the hover. I want my line underneath the water surface. We're almost always going to have a breeze in the mornings at Henry's. And if you've got your floater out there and you're having to work that line slow, that wind is going to create a belly in that floater. And it can get really frustrating because you're going to feel fish, but it's as they're saying goodbye.
Yeah.
So if you can get a hover and get it underneath the surface, yeah, I love that. If I only had one line to fish, it would be an intermediate, whether it's the clear or the Camel Lux, either one, that 1.5 to 2 inches
per second.
But I don't want just one line. So,
Yeah.
The hover, the intermediate, and then, you could use the Type 3. A lot of times early in the season, when the water gets warmer, those fish can move out into a little deeper water. And if you're using an intermediate, you're fishing 10 to 12 feet, you can still do it, but you're having to count down 60, 70 seconds on every cast. And
yeah.
If you're fishing all day long, that can be a lot of casts that you're not getting a bug in front of the fish.
To me, it's definitely a lake rather, for those slower sinking lines, because it's just, when it's averaging, was it averaging 12 feet? To me, there's a lot of skinny water there.
Right. Most of the fish that we catch, like you mentioned earlier, when we caught those fish in the shallows, that's the fun thing about Henry's is the seasons. But we can catch fish anywhere from 1.5 feet deep to 4 feet for a month,
mm-hmm.
and not have to go any deeper than that. And so if you don't have a hover line, you don't have one of the tools that is prime line for that lake.
Yeah. And if people don't know what a hover line is, it's the slowest sinking line you can get, sinks at about 1 inch per second, depending on the manufacturer. And I'll put in the show notes, but I did a whole 2-episode set on understanding and making sense of stillwater fly lines. I think, Darren, you can agree, most times people transferring from a moving water fishing to lakes and just overwhelmed by the volume of line choices and trying to make heads nor tails out of it, it gets to be a little intimidating. And unfortunately, I think it maybe pushes some people away, thinking they need all these lines when, each lake's a little different. And you and I both like lines, but that doesn't mean you need all of them all the time. So
right. And it's not only intimidating, but when people come up to me at a seminar and say, how many fly lines do you have in your reel bag there?
Yeah.
I start counting them, and it's like 15, 16, 17, and they're going, wait a minute, at $100 a piece, plus a spool, I can't afford that.
Yeah. Well, you don't have to go buy them all on Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly.
You gather them over time.
Yeah, over time. Some of my favorite lines are still lines that I bought back in the 80s.
Yeah, there's still that, isn't there? That, it's like, and fly rods are the same, and other things where that manufacturer made that one particular product for a short period of time. It was fantastic. We all fell in love with it. And then it got discontinued for whatever reason. And everybody's just, if you can find that, you grab it, right? So
I'm always watching eBay for an old, see, when Scientific Angler first introduced their quote unquote uniform sink, it wasn't the parabolic like it is now. It would sink in a level. Otherwise, the tip wasn't sinking slower or faster than the belly. It all sank at once. And the old quote-unquote uniform sink Type 3 was my favorite line in the world.
Yeah, they used to make it called the high-speed high D. Everybody wanted that one too, which was about a type, back then I think it was a Type 3 sink rate. So when you look nowadays, when we got 6s and 7s, it wasn't so high-speed high D.
Not at all.
What about leaders? Everybody likes leader setups and formulas, and we can spend hours on debating the pros and cons of every leader system. On your, let's say, on talk about your floating line. How do you set up? How do you like to set up your indicator leaders?
My indicator leader is pretty easy. In fact, both my indicator leader or my indicator setup and my hover setup, I use a nylon 20-pound butt that's probably 30 inches long.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I want that is because nylon or monofilament is going to float, where if I'm using the fluoro, it sinks faster.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I go intermediate, anything heavier than that, then I'm using everything is the fluorocarbon
Okay.
because it's going to sink. I don't want anything to keep my line from not sinking. On the other hand, with my floater, I think you and I are probably spitting images with each other as far as that goes. I go probably 2 feet, 20 inches of 20 pounds, and I run that with a nail knot. I don't use one of your tippet rings or your new lines, and I've seen those, and I
That's okay.
absolutely love those. However, I'm old school. From there, I go down and blood knot down to wherever I want my swivel. And from that knot to where my swivel is will always be the same pound test.
Mm-hmm. Level.
Otherwise, if I'm running, red label or whatever, I'm running 10 pounds from there all the way down to my swivel.
Yeah.
And that depends on what my depth of my water is. And then from there, my swivel, if I'm running 2 flies, I'll run a tag off of that swivel. Otherwise, I'll run probably 2 to 3 feet down to my fly from that swivel. And I pretty much leave that alone except for changing flies. Everything that I change as far as water depth goes from the swivel to my blood knot. And I'll have a couple of blood knots in there just because it's easier for me to say, hey, that's where my swivel or my indicator goes is 2 inches below the third knot.
Yeah.
And it's easier for old guys to keep track.
And of course, by the end of the day, your leader doesn't look as nice as it did when it started. It's all been chopped and changed. It's longer, it's shorter, it's all put together because you want to keep fishing.
And if I'm retrieving, Phil, the only difference between that on my hover and my intermediate lines, I'll step that down a little bit down to 10-pound test. And I'm almost always running either 10 or 8 pound.
Yeah, you don't want to go light
for a main leader, but I run it long.
Yeah.
Most of the guys on the stillwater, I think, will run 7 to 10 feet. And, they think anything over 9 feet is long.
Yeah.
I'm a believer of 12 to 15 to 18 feet on my leader, especially if I'm using more than one bug. Normally, when I'm fishing stillwaters, I use one bug.
Well, where Henry's is, sometimes that second fly gets to be a pain in the butt because it's hanging up on everything. And if you hook a fish, it's going, it's one of the times you need to think about. I think single flies is when you're fishing in those kind of rich, weedy conditions. One fly is challenging enough sometimes to keep it weed free. To have 2 on there, plus I think it accelerates the sink rate of everything at times as well. So yeah, that's what makes it unique. Yeah.
If you're using that countdown method,
yeah,
having an extra fly on there just kind of screws up my count.
Yeah.
So if you were to go out on any given day, let's just say we'll go over to Targhee Creek, one of the marquee places on the lake. You could probably sit there and count 20 boats within 75 yards of each other.
Mm-hmm.
The guys that have been out there doing it the longest, the guys that catch the most fish, the guys that make everybody else scratch their head, almost all of them are using one bug. And it's because of that extra undergrowth. Usually if you've got 2, that's just something else that you've got to clean off.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's what we see.
When you are using 2 flies, you mentioned when you're fishing vertically on an indicator, you're about 2 to 3 feet apart. How about when you're fishing, cast and retrieve with your hover or intermediates? How far do you like to keep the flies apart if you're using 2 flies?
At least 3 feet. Now, I know this is about Henry's, but I love pyramid too, and I always fish 2 bugs down there.
Yeah.
But they're 6 feet apart from each other. So, yeah, Henry's 6 feet apart. I'm not going to say it's not feasible. It's doable. But, yeah, it just doesn't give you control that I like over that one single bug and where it's at, what it's doing, the retrieve you're doing with it, different things like that.
Any other things, rods, lines, and leaders people need to know for Henry's, rather?
No, but like you teach, and like I like to teach my seminars, is the depth pattern retrieve. Now you turn yours around, depth retrieve pattern.
Yep.
because I like Henry's, I switched those last two. And it's not that they're not really important. The first one is depth. If you can have any bug on it, Henry's, and if you're not down where those fish are or at the level that those fish are hanging out, you're just going to watch everybody else.
It's best fly in the world. If it's not where the fish are, it doesn't really matter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When it comes to the retrieving the pattern, the reason I switch it is because you'll hear people talk about how selective fish are on the Madison or on the Henry's Fork or on the South Fork of the Snake or any of these renowned trout streams. I will put Henry's Lake fish up as being selective against any moving water fish there is. There are days when you will pull your hair out. I love to throat pump fish and try to match them exactly, and it's a huge puzzle some days.
Well, yeah, because some days you do that throat pump and they're full of those little scuds, and it's
exactly.
Thankfully,
but then that retrieve is really important too, because like we saw last fall, we're doing our normal 8-inch, what we call an 8-inch Henry strip, which is just a normal cadence 8-inch strip. They didn't want that. They wanted everything fast, and it took us a minute to discover that. But boy, once we did, it got pretty fun.
Yeah, usually you figure that out when you're reeling in to go somewhere else and you get plowed and go, wait a minute.
Then when we moved to the shallows, it was just the opposite.
Yeah.
They wanted it really, really slow.
Yeah, it would just lock up. Yeah, that's a good point, just to keep everything varied. So you were mentioning retrieves, the 8-inch strip. What else have you got that you like?
One of my favorite strips, especially early morning in Henry's, is get your bug down close to the bottom and just rip it in as fast as you can. And I mean, not doing the roly-poly with 2 hands, but either a little baitfish imitation. One of my favorite bugs is called a Halloween leech, and it's not really a leech; it's more of a woolly bugger, but it's got that orange-brown variegated chenille with a brown tail on it of marabou. And for some reason, those fish, when you rip it fast, I don't know what they think it is, whether it's a little bait fish or what, but they can really get on it.
Yeah. Or maybe they just see it moving and to them food moves, so go get it, right?
Absolutely.
No, it's a good thing fish don't have flashcards down there, right? Now go, wait a minute, that's not that.
In those mornings that you catch them on the fast retrieve, I don't want to say it's cheating, but it is almost cheating, because all you got to do is strip it, and if they hit it, you don't have to strip set or nothing. They hook themselves.
Not many companies are building their own gear these days, but Intrepid Camp Gear is changing that. Based in Boulder, Colorado, Intrepid designs and manufactures some of the most rugged, technically advanced rooftop tents and aluminum cargo cases on the market. Their gear is built in-house with patented designs that stand up to the elements and the miles. Whether you're chasing elk deep in the backcountry, hunting for fresh powder, or heading out for your next fly fishing trip, Intrepid gives you the confidence to go further. Their rooftop tents keep you warm, dry, and off the ground. Their cargo cases, bomb-proof, weather-tight, and ready for just about anything. So stop settling for flimsy, mass-produced gear. Level up with the gear that's built to last and engineered for real adventure. Go to wetflyswing.com/intrepid right now to get started. That's INTREPID, Intrepid Camp Gear. Get started right now.
Any other go-to flies you like? I know you introduced me to that little crystal bugger, that brown one.
Absolutely. And a crystal bugger, just for people's, just so they know what it is, it's basically a woolly bugger.
Yep.
And then we just use a little brighter, some of the crystal chenilles or the crystal dubbing as a body. And then some guys will like to put a little bit of crystal flash or mylar in the tail. All of my woolly buggers or my crystal buggers have got just a plain marabou tail, and they're fairly sparse.
They're very sparse.
Yeah.
And you also liked, I noticed, a really short hackle on them, almost undersized. So if you're, were we using a size 12?
We were throwing, actually, it was a size 10.
It was a 10, yeah. I knew it was small.
It was size 10, but see, my hackle on that is actually for a size 16.
Yeah, very small.
Yeah, very small. So, yeah, they are. In fact, if you go back to some of the old books, and the Bible for Henry's Lake was written by a gentleman named Bill Schiss.
Yeah.
And it's Fly Fishing Henry's Lake. And I mean, it's been around since the mid-90s. I think it came out in 96, 97, somewhere in there. Right in the heyday. Right when I was one of those tubers that everybody cut. But he's the one that has really probably the father of some of these fly patterns, and a lot of us have developed little offspring of them and just build them a little better. I can remember some of the old fly patterns. They'd say that you palmer your hackle and then trim it close.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I hate trimming hackle,
Yeah.
period. And so I always like to use the smaller, otherwise if I'm using a 10, I'll go down at least 3 sizes.
Yeah.
I'll go down to a 16. If I'm using 12s or 14s, 14 is one of my favorite bugs up there. Is a caddis imitation, and it's called a mighty mouse.
Yeah.
They call for a big old thick body on that and a big palmered hackle on it. Mine is almost completely opposite. It doesn't look anything like it. We still call it a mighty, but it's as thin as you can use it. It used peacock earl. The original recipe calls for 3 strands. I used 1 strand, 1 wrap of hackle on. As far as that goes, just I peel the hackle and then wrap it forward, but just 1 piece of hackle.
Okay. So you're stripping the stripping off one side of it, so you're only wrapping. Yeah. Okay. Just to keep
I've only
it
got
sparse.
one side standing
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
And so the thing that I learned up there, and I learned this from my brother.
Mm-hmm.
My brother is one of the quote unquote old timers, and he's also an artist. That's how he made his living, was illustrating artist. He taught at one of the colleges down here in Idaho. His fame was probably Prince of Egypt, Spirit,
Mm-hmm.
the animated horse show.
Okay.
And then he did a lot of the Harry Potter promotional stuff when
really
it first
cool.
came out. He worked at DreamWorks, but his art went right into his fly tying. And because he was a teacher, he got to spend every summer up there for a bunch of years. And it was a labor of love, but you'd be proud of him. He loved that throat pump, and he'd pump those bugs out and then make his bugs look like them. And so a lot of the bugs that I use, a lot of the bugs that I teach people to tie are imitations of what my brother Wade pretty much has come up with.
Okay. And you mentioned that book by Bill. It's still available. We'll put links to it in the show notes. I know our mutual friend Mike at Drift Lodge and Fly Shop carries that there. They're probably one of the great shops there that actually caters to stillwater fishing and Henry's Lake in particular. So he's got a great operation there with a fly shop and accommodation options as well. So yeah, and that book I got it. It's, as you said, it's the Bible, little blue book. It's not very thick. It's not going to take you 3 months to read, but it's got all the spots marked in there. All the reference points. I think he breaks it down seasonally. He's got fly plates in there. So if you want to tie some of these patterns that Darren is mentioning and others, you can see the originals right there. I think Bill, is he still tying commercially?
No.
He is.
No,
okay.
He's got his business, and he lives down in Idaho Falls now and is retired. And
I know he was still, a couple of years ago, in a Mike's shop, and he was dropping off some flies he was still tying, so he must have just recently stopped tying, because Mike had still some original Bill Sheese patterns that he would tie. He would bring them in a little box and drop them off. I had the good pleasure of meeting Bill and talking with him. Very modest man, and he said he actually took a little bit of heat when that book came out. I guess some of the old timers didn't like him giving away the secrets, but as you've taught me when I went to Henry's, all the secrets in the world still didn't help some days.
Absolutely. I remember one day at Staley Springs, Bill gave me a tip on keeping my rod tip just an inch or 2 above the water out of my float tube. So when I'd retrieve my paws, that line would droop just a little bit.
Yeah.
And he says, if that line all of a sudden doesn't droop or you see it straighten, that's probably a fish.
Yep.
And that was one of the most memorable lessons I've ever had. And it taught me how to catch a lot more fish than I was at the time.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. Watching for those line takes. The line, when you strip it, rises up, and when you pause, it droops down. And then if you're pulls up again or starts to pull up and you're not doing any retrieve, then something else is pulling on it in the form of a fish on the other end. So that's a great tip. What else we got here? Any other flies you like?
Boy, I'll tell you what, that little root beer crystal that I told you about, you can tie that in innumerable colors. That one is root beer. It's kind of a lighter brown.
Yeah, it's almost
a darker brown, a black, an olive.
Yeah, root beery color. It makes sense. It's not a deep dark brown. You mentioned olive as well, and I think you said black, of course.
Yeah, and one of my favorites in that pattern is not quite chartreuse, but really close. It's a real light ollie.
Yeah.
And when the damsels start moving early in June, sometimes that bug can be a good ticket. But the thing about Henry's is it's like any other stillwater. You can get out there one day and have a good day on a pattern. The next day, they don't want anything to do with that pattern.
Yep.
And so every day, you've got that puzzle that you've got to start working out. Now, sometimes the pattern's easy. Sometimes it takes us a little while, like it did us last fall.
Yep. Yeah, it did. And then we kind of ran over him by accident and went, that's about the fifth hybrid I've seen scoot away. I said, you and I are like, I think we should stop here and just see what's the convention going on here we're missing. So other flies, you mentioned the mighty mite, the crystal buggers.
Yeah, if you're going
leeches.
to come to Henry's, you've got to have a bunch of chronomids. Anything from your basic ice cream cones to your silvers, a lot of darker beads, lighter bodies. But again, you'll go through a half a dozen before you find out which one they're going to eat. And the fun thing about Henry's is, generally speaking, if you put the right bug on, they let you know pretty quick. And if you find the right pattern, sometimes you can be in a group of boats. And, there's only one or two boats that's catching fish, and you can have the same exact pattern, but it's just the way the guy ties it and be a little more sparse than the other guy.
Okay, you've been mentioning chironomids, damsels, leeches, and stuff. Is there if you were to draw a hatch chart for Henry's, what would it look like? What bugs come off in what order and
Cronies
when?
first.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, when ice hop first comes out, pretty much big stuff. Your leeches, your crystals, any of your bait fish imitations like that. Those fish want to eat when they first, have free water again. Then our cronies come off. Then the damsels. Then we have a really good caddis hatch. And yeah, that keeps us going for a good month. And those fish remember that all the way into the fall. You'll catch them on caddis imitations. But we also have calabatus in there too. And sometimes those fish, especially in the shallow waters, Howard Creek, uh, over Duck Creek, some of those fish can just get boiling on calabatus.
So they're eating
So,
the nymphs and the adults?
and once in a while, back last year, we were having a fairly good morning there at the state park, which is Howard Creek. It's kind of weird. You launch your boat, you're at 100 yards from the shore, and you've got the state park, all the campers and everything. It's like I don't know, like fishing in Central Park in LA. The calabatus starts coming off about 10 o'clock. And every once in a while, you'd hear a fish hit an adult because you could hear him gulp, or you see a bubble, and you could tell that that's what they were doing. And there's one guy that came out here, and he was bound, bent, determined that he was going to catch them on dries. And about every 15 minutes or so, hey, got another one on Adams. So, yeah, you can catch them there on dries. But, yeah, the vast majority are underneath the surface.
And same with the caddis, mostly on the pupa patterns and nuts.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. How big are the caddis? What size are we talking?
Generally, we're tying them. Sometimes we'll tie them in a 3X long size 8.
Ooh.
We get a lot of those night caddis, or those,
travelers or motorboat big ones. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And they get big. Most of the caddis patterns that I tie are in size 10, standard length, 10s or 12s.
Okay.
So, yeah, my favorite hook up there is the Hannock 925.
Yeah.
Which is a stout hook. I've never had one fail at Henry's on a fish. So, yeah, that's what I tie most of my bugs on up there is the Hannock 925. Like I said, they're standard length. So a lot of the guys will tie them on 2 or 3X long, but they'll go 12s, 2X long, something like that.
What's your favorite caddis pupa pattern? What's it look like?
I would probably call it Henry's Lake Renegade.
Oh, okay, yeah.
The old Renegade, which has got the brown hackle on the back. It's got a peacock girl
body,
mid body, and then a white on the front, white hackle on the front. Well, the Henry's Lake Renegade has got, and you can tie it with a little red tag, a little thread tag just below that rear hackle, and then you just one twist of your hackle. And again, I downsize those hackles on that bug. And then I also used a little wire rib, kind of work holding my peacock girl body down. Otherwise, if you do it with just a peacock girl, or even if you thread it up, they just don't last very long. Those fish will trash those bugs pretty quick. And so if I counter wrap a little piece of small or extra small wire, usually in a gold or a red,
Mm-hmm.
those are my two favorite colors. And in a real small one wrap, a hackle on the front.
Very sparse.
And when the caddis are moving, that could be, if I only had one flight of fish entries, that's probably what it would be.
Yeah. What about your damsels? You mentioned damsels. Got any favorite damsel patterns you like?
Yeah, we've got one of the cool thing about damsels, most of your damsel patterns work if you tie them real skinny, real sparse. The cool thing about those damsels, and I've watched them crawl out of my boat and morph, the color of those nymphs is Kelly green, G.I. Joe green.
Yeah.
And so a lot of my damsel nymphs are bordering chartreuse because I want it just bright, because that's the thing that I noticed is they're just a bright Kelly green when when they climb out. And so a lot of times those fish will key, I think, on the color of that bug.
Yeah, that's probably why that little sparse bugger of yours works so well as well.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
I'm sure it does, especially if you're ripping it quick.
All right, let's talk about the scourge of many stillwaters that people hate to fish but work so well, are scuds. Because there's just so many of those things. It's a bit
That
of a
is
needle in a
the
haystack.
staple.
Yeah, but
Yep.
I of any fish I've ever throat sampled, they're always in there. Not the biggest scuds in the world. It's probably like Argentina. The poor things don't get that big before somebody's chowing down on them.
Yeah, and that's what makes them tough to fish. A lot of guys, I've seen guys use a little beaded scud pattern that they'll hang under an indicator and do extremely well. And that's one of my goals this next season, is to become better that way with some of those patterns. As far as stripping a scud, as small as they are, it's almost tough. If you're fishing two bugs, a lot of times you can put that as your dropper.
Yeah,
But to just use that as your single fly,
it's
there's
tough.
times that I've had good days on that, but generally we'll eat something a little bigger.
Yeah, I think we look at a lot of times, at least the way I grew up, if it had those little scuds, little tiny hyalellas or immature gamma shrimp in them, it told you the fish were eating, and you could usually get them to eat a leech or something a little bigger. Typically we ran into that kind of situation in the fall months, and that's when we were there. They start switching over to those staple bread and butter food sources to fatten up for.
Well, and they eat a lot of them.
Yeah.
If a guy ever has to kill a fish and he cleans it, I killed one fish last year out of all the fish I caught up there, and the meat, it looks like salmon that comes from
It's
Alaska.
the
They're
carotene.
just that bright orange.
Yeah, rich in scuds.
That's part of our scores. Is people like to eat them. So I want to leave my pets in the water.
Yeah. Any other insects in there? You got some snails. I know sometimes people try and imitate.
Yeah, they do every once in a while. Dragonfly nymphs. A lot of times I think that when we're using a bushier bugger, I think that that's what they think those are, especially if you run them in little bursts as you retrieve. Yeah, we've got quite a few of those. I think later in the year, the big thing that people overlook is bait fish imitations and small, skinny bait fish imitations. They see the gear guys coming back and they'll catch a fish or two on a Rapala that they're cranking, and so they figure, hey, I got to throw, something that I got over at the slide in.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that Kelly's bugs don't work.
No, they work great.
I know they do.
Yeah.
I've got a whole box of Kelly's bugs. But sometimes I think on the stillwater, smaller is better.
Yeah, we have that in ours. We've got two species of minnows getting our lakes, fathead minnows and brook stickleback, and they're both very small and, a small little, an eighth's big, right? And slender little zonkers or, little, I think sometimes half of the times those little micro leeches, the small leeches we fish, they're taking them, they got the coloration of those bait fish as well. So they're taking them for that.
Yep. Especially if you're using one that's maybe balanced that you're using as a retrieve, so you get that extra motion on them. Yeah, that works good.
So have you got there's lots of spaces, lots of places around Henry's? Have you got some favorites? You've been mentioning some like Targhee and Howard. There's a number of creeks that come into Henry's that feed it, right? So if we start off in let's say the northeast corner up by the interchange there that takes you back out of Idaho towards Montana. Is that Highway 2?
Right. Yeah.
I've driven it so many times. I'm just kind of in a trance, just sort of driving and not really paying attention. I know I'm going in the right direction.
Yeah, the North Shore, where the hatchery is, where Wild Rose is, there's a lot of good water along there. especially early in the year. Early in the year before our weed growth comes up, our spring season, the fish are scattered everywhere, and so you're basically just searching for fish. Once you find a pocket of fish, that's the fun thing is sometimes that you can sit there and pick off several. Then if it slows down, then you got to move around and find a little bit more. As you work around the lake counterclockwise from the North Shore, then you're going to come over to the Timber Creek Pintail Point area, which has got a lot of springs. Before they put the dam in, that's where the old Timber Creek came into the reservoir or into the lake. And so the old stream channel that goes through there has a lot of old willow clumps, old down trees that are still in there and different things like that. So if you go in there, sometimes you can have good days, but you're going to lose some bugs on,
Yep.
submerged stuff. As you move around from Pintail Point, probably the most popular place on the lake is Staley Springs. In the old days, it was called the Springs, but yeah, Staley's used to be the best place on the lake. Back when I learned how to fish the lake in the 90s, in the tubes, that's where in July, August, that's where 90% of your fishermen was around Staley Springs. Unfortunately, we've loved that part of the lake to death. We've got huge, big old $1 million homes that ring all the way around Staley's, above Staley's, up, down,
Yeah, there's some
and all of
beautiful
those
houses
wells
there.
have pretty much
Yeah.
killed our spring.
Yeah.
We have no flow, and when we have no spring flow, all of the weeds have gone back in. Last year is the first year that we could only find one little circle that was weed free in what used to be the best place in the lake. So if you pick up that book from Mike up there at the lodge, or if you order one online, a lot of the things that Bill talks about in that lake have changed just because our water conditions have changed. Duck Creek used to flow really nice. Targhee Creek used to flow really nice. Now they've got pivots, and those pull out of the aquifer, and so those creeks come down. Now, thankfully, we've got a group up there called the Henry's Lake Foundation. Damon Keene used to be the director. Now it's Kevin Scanador, and those guys do so much good work on the tributaries, putting whether it's bridges or irrigation diversions to keep the fry going out into the fields or into the pasture. It keeps the fish in the creek. And the way they're doing it, they're trying to keep more water in the creek. They're keeping the cattle out of the creek, which is good. And so, yeah, the Henry's Lake Foundation, along with those landowners around the lake, they've done a lot of really good things to help the lake. And we're on an upturn. This year, we're going to get more fish, bigger fish.
Okay, so we're moving now down the West Shore, down by the
West
county
Shore, you
launch.
go to Staley's.
Yeah.
Then you come to the county dock, which is Frome Park.
Yep.
Great place to camp. It's just a dry camp, but it's got a boat dock, so you can launch your boat there. Straight out from there, east from there is some good water. Usually you're 8 to 12 feet right in there. Then around the corner, especially in June, you get into the area that's called Gamsel Heaven. And yeah, shallow water. So sometimes if the pelicans are in there heavy or the cormorants are in there heavy, the fish may not be in there very good numbers. You're going to have to go out in a little bit deeper water. But that's what makes that fun in the fall, is because that area in the fall, those fish will move back in there because all of the predation is left. And that's one of the places that we did well last year one day. Then from that area, Gamsel Heaven, then next is Duck Creek. And that's, I guess, overall, that's probably my favorite area on the lake. It varies anywhere from 1.5 feet enclosed where Duck Creek comes into the lake to where you can go out and find holes in the weeds out in 12 feet of water. That's where we were fishing that morning that you caught your big fish last fall, was just out Duck Creek in 6 feet of water. And you just have to putt around and find holes in the weeds. And as soon as you find the holes in the weeds, that's chuckarama for the fish.
Yep.
From there, you get over into Hope Creek, which is in the southwest corner. You've got the cliffs. Hope Creek is tough because it's really weedy, really fast. It can be good in the fall, but most of those fish are either living in the weeds, or else the predation's pretty heavy on them, and so they move out of there during the normal months of the season. Fall and spring, they can be in there pretty good. Then you've got the cliffs on the south side, which can be really good. There's a bunch of springs that come into the lake over along there. It could be good either retrieving, or a lot of guys, that's one of the indicator hangouts is over there. Goose Bay, which is getting back over towards the state park, good place for cutthroats. It gets really weed choked as the season goes on, and so a lot of people don't pay a lot of attention to it. It can be fun if you sneak in there in an evening when it's a little bit windy out on the main lake because it's sheltered from the wind that way. Then you get into Howard Creek. Howard Creek and Target Creek on the east side, and Howard Creek is on the northeast corner. Those are probably, or express the northwest corner. Those are probably the marquee places of the lake. Good caddis hatch, good calabatus hatch. You'll get damsels in there, all kinds of stuff. Lots of crannies early in the season over at Targhee Creek. That's the cats hangout is over at Targhee Creek.
Now, in the fall months, one of the first times I fished Henry's, brought my big boat down, launched it at the state launch,
Yep.
and everybody was fishing right off the beach
Yeah.
because that's where they plant a lot of the cutthroat in there and they kind of come back. Is that right? Is that my understanding?
Yeah, they do. If you're there early in the year, yeah, the kind of places that we found on are the boat docks, just because a lot of people stack up right around there because when Fish and Game launches all those fish, yeah, that's where those fish are going to come back and they crowd up there. And so, it's tough to launch a boat when everybody's stacked up around the launches.
Yeah, and I launched, and I basically, launched, and I went out and sat and fished back towards the launch, almost into the east of it, and I sat there for about half an hour. I think I caught a couple of fish. And I went, I did not come all